And what's going on, rainy Los Angeles? Jamal, that intro music kind of brought me to the beach. Little like Descanso Catalina, little club music there. What's
I
going
love
on? How you
it.
doing?
The theme song. I mean, my God, you're ready to sort of just jam out. Right? You're getting beach vibes. I'm getting a little Vegas pre-party vibes. Before the party starts, but you got the mixers going, you got your buddies, and you're ready to have a great night. So can't get enough of the
Yeah,
theme song.
it was kind of like when we were in Vegas for the Pac-12 championship, and you guys should have seen Jamal at his Sunday best on, the nice suit, the nice what do you call those wingtips you were wearing? Or I mean, they were some nice looking shoes. Looking good, and we went out to the club for a little bit and got to get our dancing shoes on, so it was fun. But what's up, everybody? Live here on the LA Football Network, talking Chargers. A lot of things have kind of happened since about this time last night when Eric Kendricks signed. So Jamal and I wanted to get on here and talk Kendricks, talk a little bit about this Austin Ekeler situation, talk about Pipkins, who is going to be back in a Bolts uniform, and maybe potentially any other moves that we could see over the next couple days. So excited. I feel like we haven't done a live since the season ended. So excited, Jamal, to get some questions from people, hopefully, and have some fun here for 30 or 40 minutes or so. But how's your day going? How are you? We didn't get to talk too much during the day, and now we get to talk for a while. So how's the day going?
No, I'm feeling good, Ryan. Always great to be back home inside when it's raining, and then the ability to sort of talk sports and talk football and talk shop and talk to Chargers. I mean, what could be better?
Well, right off the bat, we got Dirty Chai chiming in right here. Madman, answer my
Will
toast.
Dirty Chai Decker chiming in there. He sent me 2 text messages this morning. I was in like back-to-back meetings all day. So yes, Dirty Chai, I will be responding to you as soon as this is done. We love you. So
If it makes you feel any better, Will, me and Jamal didn't even speak until I hit live, and this is the first time we're talking. So it's not you. He's a busy guy, and we're blessed to have him though, and talking Chargers. So yeah, we'll let people get in here, get your questions in. Kim Steckler, I see your question. Hopefully you're still here. We'll get to that here in a bit. So just let those roll in. But let's start with Kendrick, since that happened first. Yeah, might as well. And LA royalty, if you will, here as a UCLA legend. You could argue maybe the greatest UCLA linebacker in history. Some good company there, but Anthony Barr is another one. Ironic, they both played on the same team in the NFL as well. But now is going to be a Charger, and I could not be more thrilled. But we'll talk about what that looks like, how he fits, what that means for Drue Tranquill, yada, yada. But just off the bat, just your thoughts when you saw the news yesterday, right after we got off the phone, and then all of a sudden some news breaks. So what was your thoughts on the signing?
Oh, I was really excited, Ryan, because it brought me back to the UCLA days, and Kendricks was part of some of the most famed recruiting classes in UCLA football history. That sort of peak 2012 to 2014 era with Jim Mora, the best UCLA has been until now in the last 25 years and since the turn of the century. And so he did such wonderful things as a Bruin when he was wearing the powder blue and gold last. Then he comes and a two-time All-Pro, and what a decorated career he's had. Most notably with Minnesota and the Vikings, and now he comes in, I think, providing veteran leadership, providing incredible pop and tenacity, and I think perhaps maybe a little long in the tooth at this stage in his career for that position, maybe slightly on the other side of his prime and his peak. But I think someone who's going to come in and make a huge impact. And sadly, it's a little bit bittersweet because I think it signifies that Tranquill isn't going to be able to come back to this team given the market rate for him. And obviously tough choices need to be made. But I think Kendricks has that it factor, that magnetic factor that you need to play the linebacker position in the NFL. The reason we sort of fell in love with Tranquill the second half of last year, I think, are a lot of the characteristics that Kendricks brings to the table. So if you can't have Tranquill, I think this is the next best thing. And the fact that he's a hometown legend, I think it even just helps enhance the notoriety and the brand for the Chargers in LA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get my thoughts on how he can fit and what he could do. But speaking of Tranquill, he was on our last episode, most
He's
important.
my guy.
And my guy too, love him. I thought he was the heartbeat of this defense. I mean, outside of Derwin James, I think he was the best defender on the field for almost the entire year. And so this most likely indicates he will not be back. Now, Kendricks' contract is, 2 years, 13 million and some change, basically comes in at 7.5 million per year. Do you think I mean, it's gonna be really interesting, but do you think just seeing that, do you think Tranquill's asking for double digit in the millions? Because I look at a guy like Denver just re-signed a guy by the name of Alex Singletary, right around that 7 million mark as well. And when you look at them last year statistically, almost identical. Singletary actually had about 20 more tackles. They kind of go match for match. So I figured that was kind of going to be the going rate for Tranquill. But then seeing Kendricks get that rate or even a little bit more, I wonder if
Yeah.
Tranquill's asking that much more, or management just thought, you know what, Kendricks may be older, but he's so proven, and Tranquill, we love him, he's great, but we want to go with the guy that we've seen do it for 9 years as opposed to 9 games, if you will.
Yeah, no, Ryan. I think the 9 years to the 9 games, I think, is a great point. I think Tranquill's going rate, given what he meant to that defense, I think you're looking at somewhere 3 years, 25 to 30. I think that's kind of where he's going to be playing, and that's where I expect the contract to come in. And I think the Chargers have to play a delicate game here of how do we, maximize our window, stay very much in contention, be part of that big four in the AFC, but still find a way to shed some cap space. And I think this was a cap saving move in a way where you're still getting just about equal value back given Kendricks' age. And when you sort of factor in how they restructured the Williams contract, how they restructured the Keenan Allen contract, the conversations that they're having or lack thereof with Austin Ekeler, they've already they're in the neighborhood now of 40 million saved in terms of cap space. And so they're really saying, well, how do we get to 0.95, 0.99 in terms of talent of what we were last year at 50 million, 55, $60 million cheaper. And I think that's the game that they're playing. And for that strategy, Kendricks for Tranquill, given the price, is sort of a no-brainer from a Moneyball perspective.
Yeah, and getting into his play, I was lucky. We just got it up on YouTube, but I had earlier today, Jamal, I haven't told you, I haven't talked to you, but Matthew Culler is insider for the Vikings, so he jumped on with me. We like very spur of the moment. We talked for like 10 minutes about Kendricks. Obviously, he's covered him now for 9 years or so, and really intriguing stuff. And kind of when you look at his skill set, which I think me and you kind of know, and obviously going back to his UCLA days, but for fans that don't know, it was a great conversation. But just kind of to recap that, it's a guy that is extremely fast and athletic to the ball, really actually good, which a lot of people didn't know, in coverage, just not as good in zone coverage. So if they want to implore him on more man-to-man coverage situations, which is kind of what the Chargers have been lacking at linebacker, for sure in this Staley regime, but even dating back to past ones, having a true coverage backer in that sense. And Kendricks has done that very well. Again, last year, not as well because they moved to this Donatel zone scheme. And obviously Donatel comes from the Fangio tree. Brandon Staley comes from the Fangio tree. So let's hope that there's some learnings there on how to use him. And the other point that I thought was interesting is what made Tranquill, I mean, a lot of things made him really good. Obviously, he finished with 149 tackles total. Kendricks finished with 137, by the way, on a down year. So still very, very good in terms of a tackling machine. But what made Tranquill elevate so much better was how much they utilized him and how good he was in the pass rush down the stretch. I mean, they did a lot of fun twists and different kind of schematically getting him involved in the pass rush game. He was very good. And I think a lot of people I've seen on Twitter putting out there that they think that's going to be a big drop off for Kendricks. And Matt told me, he was like, honestly, Kendricks is a phenomenal pass rusher. They just forgot to do that last year under Donatel. Like, they just decided not to blitz at all. Like, anyone that knows a Fangio scheme, and this is what I've liked about Staley and how he's switched things up a little bit since being a head coach here. Fangio does not blitz. His scheme is not a blitzing scheme. Ed Donatel has been a long time disciple. So the Vikings last year did not blitz at all and definitely did not utilize Kendricks in the blitz. However, back when Zimmer was the coach, drew up a lot of different blitzes, and Kendricks was very, very good, very, very successful, and very, very productive. So any fans that were worried about that huge drop off from Tranquill to Kendricks in terms of pass rush, again, that's just coming from an insider that's been watching over 9 years. The guy is older, so we'll see how much he has left in the tank. But it was encouraging to hear that that shouldn't be an issue if Staley and company want to use him that way, like they did Tranquill last year. So I thought that was really interesting and really good kind of information for fans to hear.
For sure, Ryan. And, I think having followed Kendricks throughout his career, both college as well as pro, he is a terrific kind of straight line runner, athlete, aggressor when it's predetermined. And when you what do we mean by predetermined? When I know I'm rushing the quarterback or I know I'm picking up person X defensively, he's fantastic. And he's physical at the point of attack. He likes to mix it up. He's aggressive. He's got really good sort of instincts and a knack for the ball and a lot of tip balls, a lot of batted balls down and coverage and what have you. Where Kendricks struggles is a little bit in terms of sort of reflexes and reading and reacting to a defense, which speaks to your point about zone. And so when he's got to sort of drop back and then read what's going on and then process information and decipher that and then pick up an area or a person or a collection of people in an area, that's where he struggles a little bit. So I think as long as the Chargers use him effectively, and I think when the Chargers sort of played their best defense last year, it was, when they got more aggressive with Tranquill, and you and I talked about it a lot. The scheme wasn't the problem last year. The first half of the year, it was sort of hat on hat, and they were getting blown up on one-on-one situations. And so I think you're bringing a guy who his win rate, whether you're talking about pass rush or whether you're talking about coverage or you're just talking about tackling and making the right play, his win rate is exceptionally high. And we could be looking at a sneaky dark horse candidate for Chargers Defensive Player of the Year next year.
I totally agree. And, I shouldn't say I try not to do it because I do it so much, but you can always draw so many parallels between the Rams and Chargers. Obviously, Brandon Staley being with the Rams, run similar defensive schemes and whatever. And when the Rams last year signed Bobby Wagner, you said it, we kind of talked about it all throughout the year. Bobby Wagner is still a phenomenal linebacker at what he does, but it was just never like a scheme fit. Like he's an old school smash mouth, GPS to the football in terms of the run game, not very good in coverage. And so that when there was people saying like, oh, maybe the Chargers go after Wagner, never really felt like it because, again, you're running a similar defensive scheme as both teams are running because Raheem Morris basically just adopted the Staley scheme and made some adjustments. Kendricks, I feel like, fits a lot better in this scheme and will be able to do things much more in line with what Staley and company want to do, Derek Ansley wants to do. And obviously we got to see it play out. But on the surface, like I couldn't be, again, I'm still very bummed about Drue Tranquill, but if you have to replace Drue Tranquill, I couldn't be more excited about a guy that is an LA legend that has had a very, very successful career. You're adding a leadership mouthpiece to that defense. So now you have, Derwin James, you have the likes of Eric Kendricks, you have the Joey Bosa and Khalil Max. I mean, those are 4 strong leaders in the clubhouse on one side of the football. And I think that's very important as well. So to me, it's a slam dunk signing for the Chargers.
No doubt, right? I mean, slam dunk. And then when you factor in the price, right, of what the market is potentially going to be for Tranquill versus Kendricks, number of years, dollars per year, this is, you would argue that I think the Chargers got better in terms of performance per dollar, for sure, between what I think Tranquill is going to demand versus Kendricks. So I think a lot to be excited about on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, totally agree. So, before we go to Ekeler, let's answer this question since we're stuck on defense. Kim, if you're still here, thanks for sticking around. But any thoughts on the Morgan Fox situation? Are talks going well on that front? Well, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have inside information on the talks. I won't lie to you about that, Kim, so I don't know how talks are going. I would think for sure that this is one that they absolutely want to attain. I mean, Morgan Fox, Jamal, is a guy that year after year is just so productive, and year after year, like, just gets overlooked in terms of compensation. Like every year his contract is either a 1 to 2 year deal for very minimal money, and all he does is go out and produce. I mean, 6+ sacks almost every single season, and was a heartbeat on this defense, especially once they traded Jerry Tillery away. So, I mean, I would say Foxy is a guy that has to be back. We've seen Kyle Van Noy come out on Twitter defending him, saying, like, here's basically what I just said. Here's a guy that deserves so much more than he's been getting in terms of compensation. So, but what's your thoughts on Foxy, and do you think he'll be back in LA?
I think he will be. Similar to you, I don't have inside knowledge of what's going on, but Fox almost seems like the prototypical Chargers free agent, a guy who's going to be, especially this year, a guy who's going to produce, and he's undervalued. I mean, again, I think it goes back to the original point. So even if you give him a raise, that doesn't mean he's still going to get market value, because he was so undervalued the last several years of his career. So when you're playing that contention quality game against what you have to deal with in terms of cap savings, Morgan Fox is sort of like the poster child of what the Chargers are trying to do this year. So I would be very surprised if Morgan Fox doesn't come back as a Charger. The only way that happens is if some bid comes out of left field from some other team that just sort of blows the Chargers offer out of the water. I don't quite see that happening.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I feel like quiet's not the right word, but I feel like this free agency period, and maybe it's just because one of our teams, the Rams, haven't done a single thing, and then the Chargers didn't do much until late last night. But I feel like this has been a less frenetic free agency than most years. Does this make that to you, or is it mainly just because our teams aren't as going all over the place as they usually are?
Well, I think it's our teams. I mean, because my phone is still sort of blowing up 35 times a day in terms of sort of ESPN, watch outs of who's going where and what's happening. So I think it's sort of as wild as ever. I just think that the Chargers and the Rams are much more methodical in terms of what they want to do this year. And I think that's a good thing. I think oftentimes when you have these teams that are just sort of running around like chickens with their head cut off, kind of signing guys or talking to other guys, and just like there's 12 things going on at the same time, that's usually a recipe for a team that hasn't done well the year before, is low on talent, trying to make a splash, really at the bottom, working their way up. And that's certainly not the case with the Chargers. I mean, a team that we believe is a very viable AFC title contender in terms of roster construction. So they have the luxury to be a lot more selective in terms of who they go after. And I think they're doing that and doing it quite well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And they always, like, last year was not the rule, right, for the Chargers. Like, typically they are like this, more methodical, kind of keep things in house. They'll go after more of the bargain guys that they can hopefully swing on. And last year was like the big swing, and for some good stuff came out of it, and also some stuff that didn't totally pan out in terms of the J.C. Jackson injury and whatnot. But so far I think they've done stuff in line with how they have in the past, but also it comes with that too when you don't have a ton of cap, whereas last year they had whatever it was, 50, 60, 70 million to play with, which makes it much more interesting. So keeping it, so let's end with Ekeler. We'll do Ekeler at the very end. So keeping it with free agent signings, Trey Pipkins. We talked last episode, Jamal, and for those that didn't watch, shame on you. You should have watched our last episode. But for those that didn't, we talked about most important in-house free agents to re-sign. We both acknowledged Pipkins as absolutely a very important one, but you went with Drue Tranquill. I actually went with Jalen Guyton, which might surprise many, but I just think it gives them flexibility at that position in terms of the draft and free agency of not having to pigeonhole themselves. But Pipkins was probably both of our number two just because of how he's grown and blossomed, a guy they drafted in the third round, knew it was going to be a project, and we finally saw the benefits or the rewards, you should say, of their patience with this player. And super happy for Trey as he's, probably worked his butt, not probably, he's worked his butt off to get to this point, coming from Sioux Falls, small school, and now getting a 3-year, $21.75 million contract, just about 7.5 or so, 7.25 per year. So let me ask you this first. To me, and I'm going to go Chargers Rams again, just because we're in LA. It's fun. We cover both teams. To me, Trey Pipkins last year proved a lot more than what Joe Noteboom had done with the Rams. And yet Joe Noteboom got a much, larger contracts. So how impressed are you? And this is nothing against Trey, but how impressed are you with the Chargers were able to keep this number relatively cheap? I mean, 7.25 for a starting right tackle. That's a pretty damn bargain price for a good starting tackle in this league.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, wildly impressed with the Chargers for being able to keep Pipkins in the box. I'm not sure if the market for Pipkins was as strong as maybe we thought it was, or what, sort of his performance this particular past season indicated. I think because there maybe is still sort of a question of what's the ceiling on Pipkins, and B, what's the consistency. And I think those two things still being somewhat question marks, I think brought the price down. Having said that, I think it brought it down to a point where this was sort of, almost a steal for the Chargers to be able to get, a really quality, solid, offensive lineman on the right side. And I think that's, we talk about the blind side, obviously, as the critical side, of course, in terms of, protecting your franchise quarterback. But, a guy like Justin Herbert is much like many quarterbacks in this league. And I think he does this a lot more than most other quarterbacks, because he rolls to his right almost exclusively. Like whenever he's in trouble, you never see Herbert rolling left, right? His first instinct is always to go right. And so in that situation, Pipkins becomes so vital in terms of what you're trying to do to be able to extend a play. So I think for him, really happy for him. As you mentioned, he worked his tail off. For me, Ryan, I'll be honest, it was high on my list for them to get Pipkins, but could you have argued that 21.75 maybe could have gone elsewhere a little bit more intelligently, a little bit more distributed across a number of guys? Maybe. And I think it's sort of a conversation that we'll probably be having right now. But overall, you can't complain because there's such a risk of being able to hit in the draft and those guys kind of staying healthy even past training camp to really sort of make an impact. It was a safe move. Was it the most inspired move by the Chargers? Was it the most creative move by the Chargers? Probably not, but it was a safe, solid move.
Yeah, and sometimes I agree with you, but sometimes I don't know if this is playing devil's advocate or just adding on to it, but sometimes the safe move can also be the right move, right?
Absolutely.
And just to put in context, so the No Boom contract last year for the Rams, 3 years, $40 million. So they get Pipkins for basically half that, 3 years, 21.75. And No Boom, as I mentioned, if Charger fans didn't watch a lot of Rams football, was probably less proven than what we've seen from Pipkins, which is just astonishing that they got him for half the price. So, but going back to saying the safe move maybe being the right move, because I know we've talked about this, Jamal, and there was thought of like, okay, well, what if they were able to, obviously you got Rashawn Slater, Jamaree Salyer breakout last year, unbelievable. You move him to right tackle, and then you got Feiler for another year at left. You obviously have your center in Linsley, and then you got your guard and Johnson from last year. And it's like, okay, then you're not spending any added money. You're set there, and then you can use that 7.5 or whatever million to go after a receiver, keep Tranquill around, whatever. So that line of thought, I totally get. The part where I say maybe the safe move is the right move is like, you don't know exactly that can pan out, right? Like we didn't see Salyer play right tackle in the NFL. He played tackle in college. He played great at left tackle, but I've talked to offensive linemen before when we've had on the show, and they tell you like switching from right to left, whether it's guard or tackle, is like all of a sudden wiping your butt with your left hand if you're right-handed. Like it's that kind of different. Every call is different. And so there was no guarantee that Salyer would be as good as he was at right as he was at left. And even with this scenario, and I haven't even mentioned yet, but Matt Feiler has been released to free up more cap space. So the thought now is that they'll move Salyer from left tackle to left guard. But that seems like a more fluid transition because it's still on the left side of the line. So anyway, a long way of saying that I agree with you absolutely that it could have been more fun and creative. But I think this safe move was, in my opinion, the correct move. And yeah, Golden King, as I was getting to that. So thanks for pointing out. But yeah, Feiler was let go. And so now that will be the starting 5, most likely will be Slater, Salyer, Linsley, Johnson, Pipkins, and then we'll
Yeah,
add some
I mean,
depth
that's
there and see
solid.
what happens.
And Ryan, that's solid. And the other thing, what you're paying for here is you're paying for margin, right? I mean, the plan that we sort of laid out is basically not just assuming that, these transitions from one side of the line to the other are going to seamlessly pan out, but you're also making the assumption that you're not going to have any injuries. And we know that's not really a realistic assumption in today's
Yes.
NFL. So, obviously and obviously now, with the cuts and whatnot, you're sort of solidifying your 5, and you're probably going to now create that margin for yourself in the draft, but you need that margin for sure when you're in the modern NFL. So again, I think and look, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate with myself right now. And so look, I mean, go ask the San Antonio Spurs about safe and solid and what that gets you. Go ask the Atlanta Braves what safe and solid gets you. So these are the kinds of teams that have been doing that in different sports year over year. So nothing wrong with being safe and solid. That's a way to get an offensive lineman to be productive for a decade and give yourself multiple shots at a championship.
Yeah, sexy may seem like a lot of fun at 1:30 or 2 in the morning, but you sometimes wake up with a lot of regret. So sometimes the safe play
Absolutely.
has you waking up feeling
so
good.
Well said. So well
Feeling
said.
good.
And frankly, before last season, I'm not sure anyone would confuse Chargers offseason with sexy. So, I think that that's absolutely spot on.
Yeah. And the last thing we'll say about him, and this is not trying to speak negatively on anyone or any fans, but it is fun to see how scrutinized and criticized Pipkins has been basically since he's been drafted. And within that season ending, everyone was like, if we lose Pipkins, that's the worst move we could do, and yada, yada, yada. And well, here we are.
My nickname for Pipkins going into this season is going to be Kebab, because, I mean, he was skewered more by this fan base over the last 12 to 18 months than a Persian kebab. And I would know that living in Westwood. So, I mean, it's just absolutely insane. The fan base and what they thought of him. I mean, he was the butt of all jokes. He was the end of every punchline. I mean, it was almost fashionable to just bash this guy. And now here we are, $21.75 million later, and stabilizing that right side of the line, and everyone being really excited about it.
Yeah, by week 2 this year, Storm Norton took over that role of being skewered. So, and I don't think he's probably going to be back. So, but yeah, great.
With Bolt fam, it's sort of a game of musical chairs. It's sort of a game of hot potato where everybody gets that. Holds that back for a week, except Justin Herbert. So, otherwise everybody else kind of gets that.
Yeah, exactly. He's the one that is absolutely. Yes, exactly. Which, hey, we'll see. I'm excited for this year. So, but hats off Trey Pipkins. So he will be around at least for 3 years, at least based on his contract. And the offensive line seemingly is set heading into the draft, and now it's just adding depth. So, good stuff there. Should we talk potential targets, or should we just get into this Ekeler stuff? Or is there any?
I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room, the matzo ball in the room, the kebab in the room, the falafel in the room with Mr. Ekeler.
So obviously everyone knows, but I'll repeat it. Yesterday, basically asked the team's permission to seek a trade. Today, the team granted permission. So before I even dive into that or give my thoughts, just were you shocked by that? Were you know what? It is what it is. It's a business decision. What was just your thoughts when this went down the last 24 hours?
Ryan, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, I think this is just good general managing. And I think that's going to sort of, maybe shake some folks up. But at the end of the day, Austin Ekeler is sort of the Jalen Ramsey of the Chargers. I mean, a very good player, a great player at one point, who is on sort of the other side of his prime. I think if you really watched the games closely and you saw that he just, he's not an elite running back. I don't care what the numbers say. That's a function of usage rate. I mean, there were plenty of nights in the 2000s and the late 2000s, early 2010s, Allen Iverson would go for 40 points, but he would go for 40 points on 37 shots. I mean, it's sort of a function of usage rate. So I think when you sort of look at the number of touches that he had, and kudos to him for being able to absorb the punishment with that number of touches, taking nothing away from him as being really sort of an Iron Man in that regard. But when you look at the number of touches and the number of explosive plays or the number of bursts that he had, I mean, he was sort of living in the 5 to 6 yard box the whole season. And so when he's coming to you at 26, 27 years old and saying, look, I want a long-term contract, it's just not smart business. And if he wants to come and then say, hey, I want to test out what I can get in terms of the open market, I think that the Chargers did a great job in granting him that and saying, hey, let's see what comes back. And you have the agency and the autonomy to decide where you want to spend the next part of your career. And so I think the Chargers handled this really well. I think Austin Ekeler is a function of fantasy football in a way. Allen Robinson for the Rams was a function of fantasy football. We sort of get enamored by the stats. We get enamored by the 18 touchdowns rushing and so on and so forth. And we fail to recognize 15 of those were from 1 yard out, and I'm being facetious here, but that's sort of the general gist. He is a pure function of usage rate. I don't know if he is really an elite back, and I don't know if he can be the back that takes this Chargers team deep into the playoffs. So I commend the Chargers for a decisive move, a bold move in terms of strategic clarity and sticking to their guns. This is not your mother or father's Chargers. This is not your grandmother or grandfather's Chargers. The Chargers are really showing that this is a different management style, and they are really focused on being a machine that is going to contend for championships and not this sort of mom and pop shop that we've thought about them for the last 20 or 30 years.
The United States of America has the slogan, "We do not negotiate with terrorists." And it seems like the Chargers have the slogan, "We do not negotiate with running backs," because essentially outside of LaDainian Tomlinson, anytime a running back wants a higher price, they basically just, we're good. You can test the market or come back, whatever. Now, here's the thing with Ekeler, and I agree with a lot of what you said. I think he is, and I know you are saying this just in a different way, but I think he's definitely valuable to this offense, valuable to this team. But
sure.
Not at a top 3 back elite level. The problem, and I'm saying from his perspective, as it sits right now, his contract, he's paid at the average per year around 6.5 or something, which is 15th among running backs. So I agree with everything, but obviously I think his value is more than 15th. Now, where it gets hard is running back longevity, versatility, drafting, like if they're going to draft guys, like how much is it worth? And you look at teams that have shelled out for running backs. I mean, I don't see any Super Bowl rings that anyone had a top 5 paid running back. I mean, the Giants finally made the playoffs the first time ever with Saquon Barkley after drafting him, second overall. The Cowboys haven't won a playoff game with Ezekiel Elliott. Christian McCaffrey, kind of a little different situation, and that's probably one that a lot of people like to compare Ekeler to because of the versatility in the pass game and the run game. I think it's unfair to compare them, even though they are used that way. They are very different size-wise, style-wise, and different expertise. Now, do I think Christian McCaffrey was probably overpaid? Probably, because wherever he's been, didn't make the playoffs in Carolina, and the Niners obviously couldn't win with him because they didn't have a quarterback. So, I mean, we know, anyone that watches football enough knows who the most important person is on the offense and arguably on the team in general. And as much as I love Ekeler, as much as I love running backs and respect their craft, it's just really challenging to say, yeah, we're going to give you 13, 14 million a year when, I mean, it just doesn't move the needle in terms of wins and losses. And Ekeler, when you look at his even stats last year, 2 games, Jamal, with 100 yards rushing. The other 15, like 70 or less. And he was averaging basically 3 yards a carry outside of 2 games. And we can blame scheme. We can blame injuries. We can blame offensive line. But then we're just blaming everything and just wanting to create a narrative. I mean, at the end of the day, either the dude is winning you games or he's not. And I absolutely 1000% want Ekeler on this team because I think if the Chargers were able to go get a Zach Charbonnet or a Bijan Robinson or some other running back in this draft to couple, or Isaiah Spiller breaks out like we saw him be able to do at Texas A&M, you have a very viable running game. But if you're paying Ekeler $13 million a year, you're saying you are our true 3-down back because you don't pay a running back 10 plus million a year to split carries with someone and be kind of I don't want to call it gimmicky. That sounds mean, but to basically be a pass catching back. It's just not what it is. And so it's a tough situation. Ultimately, I think he'll be back in LA. I think this is more of he's going to test and see. I think he's probably going to realize, unfortunately, the market's not as much higher. As Kim just pointed out, I just saw him over Twitter as well. Just now, as we're talking, Montgomery signed 3 years, $18 million. Ekeler, I think, has had a lot more production and stats than Montgomery, but Montgomery, I mean, that's a pretty, what is that? 6 million basically. So, which is right under what Eckler's making. So I think Ekeler deserves a little raise, but I don't think he's going to see exactly what he wants. I mean, what do I know? But that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, I think this is one of those scenarios where I think Ekeler is getting paid exactly what he deserves. I think Ekeler is the 15th highest paid running back, and I think he might be the 15th best running back. I mean, I honestly, let's not conflate value with usage. And every argument with Austin Ekeler as well, he had this many touchdowns and he had this many touches. Well, that is a function of offensive scheme choice. That is a function of offensive coordinator choice. That is a function of a quarterback's choice to keep checking it down. And so if you don't make that choice, you also have to look at the opportunity cost. What were the opportunities on the field? All of those 30% of the time, 40% of the time that you checked it down to Ekeler, what else was out there in terms of yardage to be accrued on a play-by-play basis? So we are conflating 2 things here. The difference between actual value versus actual usage. I think the stats you are providing speaks to value. When you have that much of a usage rate and you still only have 2 100-yard rushing games on the season, and you're still way below 4 yards per carry, way below 3.5 yards per carry in most of your games, you're not a valuable player. It's just a poor set of choices by an offensive coordinator, by a quarterback, and by a scheme to keep giving that person the ball. So, we have to sort of divorce these 2 things. There's a difference between value in the NFL in real tangible football and then value in fantasy football. Those are 2 very different things. And while Ekeler is a dream on the latter because of usage, he is not that in the former scenario in the real game itself. So I agree with you. I think that he's going to test the market and he's going to realize the market is the same. Now the question is going to be, does he feel so disrespected that the Chargers let him, test the market? And if there was any sort of burnt bridges or sort of ruffled feathers in that process, is he going to go somewhere else out of spite? But I don't think anyone is going to give him, the payday that he thinks, when especially the fact that he's sort of on the other side of his prime. And this is the most commoditized position in all of professional sports. And so if you're not Saquon Barkley and you're not Ezekiel Elliott and you're not getting the big money right out of the gate because you were just this incredible superstar in college and you're a top 5 pick and you're thought of as the next Barry Sanders, you're not going to get that payday ever. You're not going to get the payday later. The reality for a running back is your first contract is going to be your big contract. You're not going to work your way up because the tread on the tires is going to be too much by the time you get to that second contract. So frankly, Ekeler is lucky getting the money that he's getting because if he was actually a free agent, I would argue, can you imagine if Ekeler was actually sort of like a pure free agent? What would his market be? I think it's less than Montgomery at 3 and 18. I mean, if I'm sitting there and saying, if I'm looking at the value versus usage statistics, I'm like, this guy's not worth more than 4.5 a year. So in that regard, I think he's actually coming out ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, when you look at the backs in front of him, the 14 backs, a few of those are on, what are they called? Franchise tags. You got Saquon Barkley, who a lot of people will say he got franchise tag. Like they didn't pay him a big contract, and we'll see what happens this year. You got Tony Pollard, franchise tag. You got Josh Jacobs, franchise tag. So these are teams that didn't want to lose their backs because they are valuable, but we're like, I'm not shelling out. Yeah, I'm not shelling out long term. And then when you look at the bigger ones up above, obviously Christian McCaffrey probably is in a league of his own. But you look at Kamara, who's second. You look at Elliott, who's 3. You look at Cook, who's 4. Henry's 5. Chubb. I mean, all those teams probably have buyer's remorse a little bit in those big contracts because not one of those teams have done anything. And when you look at a team like the Cowboys with Ezekiel Elliott, obviously it's been known that they are doing a 2-back system, which guess what? That offensive coordinator is now the Chargers offensive coordinator. They've obviously allocated too much money for that position to do other things because they weren't even getting the production that they wanted. You look at Kamara, obviously the Saints are in a whole different world of hurt with salary cap and obviously the coaching change and different stuff like that. Cook has had his own injuries, obviously very, very good. Derrick Henry, who you could argue is the best pure running back in football, but doesn't even have really a trade market if they were going for that. Like no one's willing to give much up. So when you just look at what teams have done and what they have paid, if we're talking strictly business here, this is going to bode better for the Chargers than it is for Austin Ekeler because I think he's going to realize, this is good. I personally think he can get an extension at this same rate. I know you said about 4. I think he can still get 6 or 7, but it's not going to be more than that. I mean, it's not going to be in the 10 to 12, 13 range just based on everything we just said. So ultimately, I think he'll be back with the Bolts. I mean, he's under contract regardless. But yeah, it's just, we'll see. And running back's tough. I mean, if I have a son ever and want to play football, I'm like, don't play running back.
Don't play running back.
That's not the long-term play.
And frankly, Ryan, what is the trade market for Austin Ekeler? 27 years old, because here's the challenge with an Austin Ekeler situation. The argument for why he is valuable or the argument for why he should be getting paid more is exactly the argument why you don't want to pay him. Because you're basically saying, look at all the touches, look at all the total stats. And so when you flip that around, you're like, well, the tread is just insane. And at a time when the running backs free fall out of their prime and free fall out of production. So the same argument that you're using for why he should be getting paid more is exactly the same argument teams are going to be using for not paying him at all or having no interest in giving up a pick for him. Who would give up a draft pick for Austin Ekeler at this stage? Honestly, you would have to be the dumbest GM in the NFL. I mean, and that's no disrespect to Austin Ekeler. That is just the economics of football. That is the reality of the position that he's playing.
I think a lot of teams would give a pick, but it'd be like a 6 or 7. Like anyone out there thinking it's a day 2 pick, that's not happening. No, I mean, anyone out there even thinking it's an early day 3. I mean, if anyone gave a pick, it'd be a 6 or a 7.
Yeah, and I would argue that's a mistake too, because the ceiling that you could have with the 6 or a 7 if you hit. I mean, how many 6 or 7s have done really, really well in this league for a couple of years? The ceiling is still higher than what Austin Ekeler's ceiling is left.
Yeah. So, well, let's end with this. Regardless of what happens, like I said, I think he'll be back. I don't think a trade will happen. It's more of a testing to see about negotiations for a future contract. But regardless of what happens, and we have a full month to talk more draft stuff after free agency starts slowing down. But do you think this? I don't even want to say signifies. Maybe we could have regardless. But do you think the Chargers draft a running back in the draft, whether it's at 21? And it's a guy like Bijan Robinson if he falls, or Zach Charbonnet, which many people would probably say is a reach. I know we wouldn't say that, or even a mid-round pick because they seem to have done that every single year recently until they hit one.
I think I'm going to make a prediction here and now, and we'll see in a couple of weeks, and we can play it back if I'm right or not. The Chargers are going to draft 1 running back and 1 tight end. I see that happening, especially when you look at kind of Gerald, Everett, and where they're standing with him and some of the other things that are going on. And I think that either Zach Charbonnet, Dalton Kincaid, or Michael Mayer is going to be a Charger. I would be stunned if neither one of those 3 was a Charger next year. So running back and tight end, and one of those three guys for sure, with the other position, whoever they didn't draft, is as a collection as part of their draft class.
And I mean, I don't know how fans feel, but I would be ecstatic with any of those three guys. I mean, that would be, I think any three would be a home run. And I don't care if people think Charbonnet would be a reach at 21. I mean, I think he'd be great. If you can get him in the second round, great. I don't know how long he's going to last in the second round personally. Even a Tajay Spears would be a lot of fun. But yeah, any of those three guys, I mean, those are slam dunks. I think those are home runs for this team and this offense and this scheme. So, well, anything else, Jamal, did we miss anything from day 1 and 2?
I don't think so, Ryan. But, knowing now, it feels like the floodgates are opening for the LA teams in terms of transactions a little bit. So I anticipate you and I doing a lot of live streams over the next couple of days, and I'm getting excited.
Yes, absolutely. And I know our buddies Charters Unleashed are doing a bunch of live streams. They may go even later tonight. Who knows? But so yeah, everyone, thanks for joining us. Keep it right here for the LA Football Network. As Jamal said, we'll probably go live a bunch all week long, and we'll have content, articles, all that stuff. So thank you all for tuning in. Jamal, thank you as always, my friend. And let us know what you guys think. Hit us up on Twitter at Ryan Dyrud LAFB, at LAFB Jams. At LAFB Network is the main account. You can text us, text bolts to 31032. We'd love to hear your thoughts on any of these transactions, anything like that. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Kim, for sticking around the whole show and for dropping some questions to us. So everyone, be well, be safe. Have a great evening. Stay dry in this LA rainy weather, and we'll talk to you all here very, very soon.